Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Postdoc webinar. My name is David Bradshaw, and I'm the current FAU Postdoc Association President, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. This is a series that is co-created between FAU's Postdoc Association and the Office of Postdoctoral Affairs. And today's presentation is entitled Immigration Options for Postdocs. We're going to be discussing various work visa options for postdocs, such as HB1 and O1, J1 waiver information, and green card options, such as EB1 and NIW. Remember, we are in webinar mode, so your audio and video functions will not be available, but we are very interested in receiving your questions and promoting a discussion. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen in order to type in your questions, and I'll direct them to our speaker, Mr. Aaron Bloomberg, as well as FAU's contact for these matters, Ms. Adriana Chow Evans. Mr. Bloomberg is a partner at Fragment's Miami office, where he advises a diverse client base, including investors and entrepreneurs, colleges and universities, and multinational companies on U.S. immigration law. He has a deep experience advising distinctive immigration requirements of colleges and universities, and he works on behalf of professors and researchers to secure EB1 outstanding professor, researcher visas, and when appropriate, national interest waivers. He also assists large state universities seeking to become designated as J1 sponsored schools, and he works with various colleges and universities that have established J1 programs to ensure that they remain compliant. Aaron also advises international students on their visa options upon graduation, and represents and assists a growing number of small businesses, startups, investors, and entrepreneurs who are working to expand their business footprint in the United States. Thank you very much, Mr. Bloomberg, for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, David, and thank you everyone for having me here today. To get started, we're doing a little poll, so you should see a poll question up on your screen. If people are able to respond to that, to get an idea of what immigration status everyone has, that will be helpful. And while you work on that, we will get started. So, as David mentioned, I'm Aaron Bloomberg. I'm a partner at Fragment. Fragment is the largest and oldest immigration firm in the world. And we represent Florida Atlantic University among many universities, hospitals, companies, and individuals. So what I'm going to talk to you today are options for academic and medical professionals, which includes postdocs. There are a lot of similarities, and so that's why I grouped them all together. But this is a little overview of what we're going to talk about today. The plan is to talk to you for about 30 to 45 minutes, and then we'll do some Q&A after that. Okay, so, I think we got the results. Perfect, it's just as I had thought. So about almost half of you are on J1s, about a third on OPT, a few people on H1B, and then a few others, but mostly on J1. So that's really good. That's helpful to know. Okay, so a lot of you now are either on, most of you, on OPT or J1, and you're trying to get to green card or perhaps H1B. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. There's two groups of people in the United States and two terms that are really important to know: immigrant and non-immigrant. So non-immigrants are people that are coming to the United States temporarily, and they normally have a lettered visa type. F visa, J visa, H visa, TN visa, O visa. These are all temporary visas where someone can come for a temporary period of time. That's a non-immigrant. An immigrant is somebody who is seeking to come to the United States permanently, and an immigrant is often, or better known as, a permanent resident or a green card holder. So we're going to start the presentation by talking about non-immigrants and non-immigrant issues and non-immigrant options. And then after that, we'll move into immigrant visas and immigrant visa options. So just so you understand that terminology. So the H-1B, let's talk about that. In my opinion, it's the gold standard of work visas. And so for most of you, Why is the H-1B important? Well, for one thing, if you want to get a green card, the best option would be to first get an H-1B, and while you're on an H-1B, apply for permanent residence. It is not required that you're on an H-1B in order to file for a green card. It is just recommended, and it will make your life easier. It will reduce the number of headaches you have. The other reason why the H-1B is the gold standard is because it's very open-ended. There's certain visas that only apply to people from certain nationalities. There's a special work visa for Australians only, and other visas like that. H-1B doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what you do, as long as you are working in a professional occupation, which is a job that requires at least a bachelor's degree. And so postdocs clearly qualify for that. So for most of you, if the goal is to get a green card, the problem is that if you're trying to go from J to F, what often happens, and when I say F, I mean OPT, what often happens is that you file for the green card, your F1 OPT expires or your J1 expires, you leave the country, and then you're sitting there waiting until you get called for your interview, you get your green card, and you enter the country. If you have an H-1B, then you work on your H-1B, you travel, you live life normally, and in the background, the green card is being processed. Okay, so I know that most of you are on a J1. I don't know how many people are subject to the 2-year home residence requirement, and actually that would have been a good follow-up poll question. But I'm going to spend a few minutes discussing the 2-year home residence requirement. I would say that if there's anyone that is watching that is subject, send a message if you want to use the Q&A or chat feature, just so I know. But otherwise, let's just talk about this a little bit. If you're not on a J1, this really doesn't apply to you, but it could be something you want to understand, because a lot of individuals on OPT, if you're a postdoc, when that OPT ends, many employers will put you on a J1. And so certain people that get a J1, not all, are subject to the 2-year foreign residence requirement, which is a requirement that after your J1 finishes, you have to go home for 2 years, or you have to try to get that 2-year requirement waived. And this is really important because you cannot obtain a green card and you cannot obtain an H-1B unless and until you complete that 2-year period in your home country, or you obtain a waiver. So this is going to be really, really important. And it's also a really confusing area of law. Special exception is that if you're Canadian, you can still get an H-1B. You cannot get a green card until you get the waiver or go home for 2 years. Okay, and a few people have responded that they have the home residence requirement, so that is good to know. So let's talk about the O visa. If you're not able to get a waiver and you're not able to go home for the 2 years, really the main work visa that you would be eligible for would be the O1. If you're Australian, you could also get the E3. If you're Canadian or Mexican, you could get the TN visa. If you're from Chile or Singapore, you could get the H-1B1. But for everybody else, if you cannot fulfill that 2-year requirement, most likely the only work visa option for you is the O1. And the O1 is for people of extraordinary ability. These are the criteria up on the screen. You need to meet at least 3 of these 8 criteria in order to be approved. Also, if you are subject to the 2-year requirement, you cannot change your status inside the United States. You have to get the O1 approved, take the approval, go back to your home country, apply for a visa, and re-enter. Okay. Okay, and that's what I mentioned there. Okay, so let's talk about the 2-year requirement a little bit more. Who is subject? There's 3 ways that you can be made subject to this requirement. Either you received U.S. government funding or government funding from your home country. You're subject based on the skills list. So certain countries, not all, have skills that they have identified as critical to their country. And if you are working in one of those skills and you're from one of those countries, you automatically are subject. Most countries in Western Europe are just not on this list whatsoever, just so people know. And then the third way is if you do a medical residency or medical fellowship on a J1, you are automatically subject. So if you're not sure, you probably want to check these three factors, because you would be shocked at how many mistakes immigration officers make. Again, it's a very confusing area of law, but we often see, especially visas and people's passports, that are marked incorrectly, subject or not subject, and in fact, it's the opposite. So what you want to do is your own independent analysis, look at those three ways you can be subject, and just go one by one and eliminate them. And if you don't fall under any of those three, then you should be fine. If your visa or DS 2019 says that you are subject and you think you're not, or vice versa, you can request an advisory opinion. You see the link on the screen, and we'll share this with you later if you want to use that link. But basically, an advisory opinion, you can present your case to the State Department and they will tell you conclusively if you are subject or not. So here's that three-part test, just looking at those three ways you can become subject. So the skills list, I put the link up that you can check. And so what I would recommend is go to this link, do Control F, type in your country, and if nothing comes up, you're fine. If your country comes up, let's say it's Brazil, which has a lot of people who are subject, you find Brazil, and then below it will list the number of subject or field codes. You want to match that to what's on your DS 2019. So if your DS 2019 says that you're in subject 26.01, and you go and under Brazil, it lists 26.01, that means that you're subject. Again, even if the documents say you're not subject, you would be subject based on that. So that's why you may want to do an advisory opinion. And the subject field code is right here in the middle of the screen. Okay, so waivers. Remember, first, you don't have to get a waiver. You can go home for 2 years. And the 2 years do not have to be 2 years in a row. It could be 1 month a year for 24 years, which I do have people that are doing that. What they often do is they'll get an O1, and the O1 can be renewed indefinitely. And every summer, they go home for a couple weeks, a couple months, and then eventually, after many, many, many years, they'll have accumulated 24 months abroad. I mean, not abroad, at their home country, and then they can transition into a green card. Okay, so these are the different ways to get a waiver. So yeah, let's go to the next. Let's start with a no objection waiver. So the quickest and easiest way to get a waiver is a no objection statement. That's where you basically ask your home country to say, we don't object to you staying in the country and not fulfilling this 2-year requirement. If you're subject based on the skills list, this is normally the way to go. It's relatively quick, it's relatively painless. It does depend a bit on where you're from, because you do need collaboration from your home country, but generally this is a pretty straightforward option. Interested government agency waiver, that's a tough one. That's for someone who is doing incredible work that benefits a government agency like the Department of Health and Human Services or National Science Foundation, or something like that. Exceptional hardship, that would be if you can demonstrate an exceptional hardship to your U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident spouse or child. And you have to prove that it would be an exceptional hardship to that spouse or child if they went abroad to your home country for 2 years. And you have to prove that if you went by yourself and they stayed back in the U.S., that it would be a hardship as well. So you have to prove both of those. So it really just depends on what your situation is with your family who are permanent residents or citizens, and the situation back in your home country. Persecution would be if you believe you'd be persecuted based on a race, religion, ethnicity, if you had to return to your home country. The Conrad 30 is a special waiver only for people that did their medical residency in the U.S. and it requires you to work for 3 years in a medically underserved area. Okay, so let's now switch over and talk for a few minutes about green cards, immigrant visas. So green card holder, immigrant visa, permanent resident, it all means the same thing. It's someone coming to the United States permanently. Green cards are based on a quota. There is a quota for how many green cards are given out each year. It's allocated based on the category that you qualify under and your country of birth. For green cards, your country of citizenship is irrelevant. All that matters is where you were born. So some green card basics to get us started. I mentioned this before. You don't have to be on an H-1B to file for a green card, but I strongly recommend it. Like I mentioned before, it can be very, very challenging to file on a J or an F, but it really depends on your situation. Being in the US for many years will not help or hurt your chances of getting a green card. Someone who's never been in the US a day in their life may have just as strong or maybe a stronger case for a green card than you, because this is just not something that's considered when they evaluate cases. You can have multiple green card applications pending at the same time. So maybe you file an EB-1 and then your sister is a citizen and she sponsors you as well. You can be sponsored by an employer that you don't currently work for, as long as you intend to work for them upon getting your green card. Not common, but just something I wanted to mention. Green cards are based on your country of birth. We discussed that. And then you can always include your spouse and unmarried children under 21 in your green card application. And that's just assumed. You know, it would only be something that comes up if for some reason you did not want to include them or they did not want to be included. Okay, so number of different ways to get a green card. We're going to focus on employment-based. So we call these EB categories. There's basically 5 different categories for getting a green card through employment. EB-1, EB-2, EB-3, EB-4, and EB-5. So let's focus on EB-1 and EB-2. EB-3 is for jobs that require a bachelor's. That's not you. You all are going to qualify under either EB-1 or EB-2. EB-2 is for jobs that require an advanced degree. And there's a few different types of EB-2 we'll get to in a minute. And EB-1 is for priority workers, which is people of extraordinary ability and outstanding professors and researchers. So if you go through EB-1, it's a 2-step process. You file the I-140 and the I-485, and you skip the labor certification. Same thing goes with the national interest waiver. You skip the labor certification. And so the labor certification is where you prove that there are no minimally qualified US applicants that are ready, willing, and able to assume your position. And so by skipping this, not only does it save you about 1 year in processing time, but it also is an application that can be challenging and could possibly get denied. So if you qualify for EB-1 or NIW, which a lot of you will, and I'll explain in a few minutes, you skip step 1 and go directly to step 2. Priority date. So the date that you file for the green card, that date is your your filing date, which we call priority date. And so the way the the green card system works is that green cards are allocated based on where you were born, what category you apply under, and when you applied. So obviously the earlier your priority date, the more preference you're going to be getting. Up on the screen is the visa bulletin. So this comes out every month, and it's issued by the Department of State, and it gives us an idea of how long it takes to get a green card. So I want you on the screen to look at the far left column where it says employment-based, and underneath you see first, second, and third. For our purposes, only look at the row that says first and the row that says second, because that's EB-1 and EB-2. We're not going to talk about EB-3, EB-4, EB-5, so you can ignore everything on the bottom. So let's look at EB-1 first. you see the next column says all chargeability areas except those listed, and the letter C. So what that means is if you were born in a country that's not listed on the screen, and the only countries listed are China, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, India, Mexico, Philippines, and Vietnam. If you were born in a different country, you would go under that first column, and the letter C means it's current. It means that it doesn't matter what your priority date is. It doesn't matter if you filed 5 years ago or 5 minutes ago, they're processing everyone. Everybody is current. And you can see that regardless of which category, if you're from one of those other countries in the all chargeability areas, it's the letter C all the way down. So it's a pretty quick process. Now, if you look over to the right where it says India, and you see EB1, EB2, that's where, and also for China, you see some backlogs. And the one that's really, really bad is for EB2 for India. EB2 India, the priority date's January 15th, 2010. That means that they are now issuing green cards to people that applied on or before January 15th, 2010. And this is only expected to get significantly longer than what it is right now. So if you're from India or China especially, the benefits of getting into EB1 are huge. If you're from literally any other country in the world, it really doesn't matter too much whether you do EB1 or EB2. The processing times are fairly similar, and you're better off just looking at which one you have the highest chance of approval. For people from China and especially India, even if you don't have the strongest case for EB1, you may want to give it a shot just because it is so much quicker. And for India, the estimate right now is if you file under EB2, you're looking at over 50-year wait. For EB1, it's probably just a few years. Okay, so I have up on the screen the different green card categories under EB1, because under EB1 and EB2, there are subcategories. So under EB1, we have individuals of extraordinary ability and outstanding professors and researchers, and then a few categories under EB2 that we'll get to shortly. So let's talk about EB1 first. So for EB1, extraordinary ability, this is a category that does not require an employer sponsorship. It does not require a permanent position. And so two important things with this category. You can self-petition, so you can file without your employer involved, and you can be in a part-time position, a temporary position. It really doesn't matter. And that's great for postdocs because a postdoc is not considered a permanent position. And so postdocs actually don't qualify for a number of green card categories, but you do qualify for extraordinary ability. Now, it is the most difficult way to get a green card. The standard is very high. You need to meet 3 of the 10 criteria that are listed on the screen. Outstanding professor researcher. This is also under EB1. And so it has the same processing times as the previous case, extraordinary ability, but the outstanding professor researcher requires that you have a permanent research position or a tenure track teaching position, and you must be sponsored by the employer. It is significantly easier to get approved under EB1 outstanding professor researcher than EB1 extraordinary ability. So if you qualify for both, do yourself a favor and file under the professor researcher category. Significantly better chances of approval. Okay, so some of the criteria are applied to both EB1A and EB1B, extraordinary ability and outstanding professor, and some criteria like these 4 only apply to extraordinary ability. Extraordinary ability, you need to meet 3 criteria out of 10. Outstanding professor, you only need to meet 2 criteria out of 6. Okay, EB2. So first, there is EB2 through a labor certification. So this would be that 3-step process that I referenced before. And this would be for individuals that have full-time permanent positions and are being sponsored by their employer. If you're in a teaching position, like let's say you get an assistant professor job, you qualify under special handling, which is a condensed and abbreviated labor certification process where you only have to demonstrate that you are the most qualified of anyone else that applied for the position. For a standard labor certification, you have to prove that there's no minimally qualified US applicants. And the difference is that the special handling is for teaching positions only, and the standard perm or labor certification is for everyone else. Researchers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, economists, computer programmers, whatever it may be. So the special handling category, it's really specialized. It's only for teaching positions. So this is the three-step process, as I mentioned before. Now, the two-step process would be this national interest waiver. So the national interest waiver, assuming you're not from India or China, because this falls under EB2, where it's quite slow for people from those countries, this, in my opinion, is by far the best category for a postdoc. Because a postdoc is a temporary position, you only really qualify to file under two categories, NIW and EB1 extraordinary ability. If you wanted to get into any of the other green card categories, you would have to be promoted to a full-time permanent position. So the national interest waiver, you can self-petition. You don't need an employer sponsor, you don't need a permanent position, and it's not as difficult for the most part as an EB1 is. It's still challenging, and it's not something that I would really, recommend to someone without a PhD, but it's a good category or a great category for postdocs. So in order to get an NIW approved, you have to demonstrate the three criteria on the bottom. That your proposed endeavor, meaning what are you doing? I'm doing Alzheimer's research, whatever it may be. You have to prove that that endeavor has substantial merit and national importance. Vague terms, but relatively easy to prove for most people, depending on what you're doing. The second criteria is that you're well positioned to advance the proposed endeavor. So just because you're working on cancer research doesn't mean that you're really, playing a critical role in it or well positioned to advance the endeavor. Maybe you're just a laboratory, a lab assistant. Well, that's not going to get you there. So you have to prove that not only are you doing important work, but you're advancing that work. You're taking a leading role in that work. And then the third criteria is that it would be beneficial to the United States to waive the job offer and labor certification requirements of the EB2 category. What this means is a normal EB2 case requires a labor certification, and a labor certification, assuming you're not in a teaching role, requires that the employer advertise your position and prove that they were unable to find any minimally qualified applicants. Well, the interest in the government in promoting this labor certification is that it protects American workers and American jobs. So what you have to show them is that while the US's interest in protecting American jobs is really, really, really important, the research that I'm doing on Alzheimer's or on alternative energy or climate change or whatever it is even more beneficial to the United States than protecting the job market. That's what you need to prove. So that's the national interest waiver. Again, a really, really good category for postdocs. There also is a physician national interest waiver. I don't think we need to discuss this, but I'm happy to answer any questions on that. If anyone here would like, you can email me with the following information and we'll send out this PowerPoint so you have it. And I can do a review of your case to see if you qualify for EB1 or for NIW. Okay, and that's it. I got through that really, really quickly today, and hopefully that's good. That leaves us plenty of time for questions. So I will let, I guess, David, if you want to see what questions we have, and we can go from there.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. That was a very informative and helpful talk. So we not only have Aaron here, but we also have Miss Adriana Chow Ellison here to help answer questions. And Adriana is the Director for Global Academic Services. She is the faculty and staff university contact here at FAU, and she works closely with Aaron in addressing important employment and immigration matters. So one of the first question we have here is from somebody who is a dual citizen of Australia by immigration and Bangladesh by birth. This person arrived here in the US with a J1 visa in February 2020, and they think they have better career prospects here. So they have a kind of a two-part question here. Their first question is it okay to actually have citizenship from 3 countries? And then if it's not okay, they would like to apply for visa status in the US, such as green card, in order to stay here. And the second part of the question is if they were to get that green card, is any obligation to apply for US citizenship if you obtain a green card?
Good question. So first off, whether you can have 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 passports, it all depends on those countries. So the US is fine with it. Canada is fine with it. Australia generally is fine with it, but not every country is. India, for example, if you become a citizen elsewhere, they require you to renounce your Indian citizenship. It is a requirement. And there's a number of countries that do that. So I don't know Bangladesh, what their policy is, but that's something that you definitely want to contact the government or an attorney in Bangladesh to find out. I'm almost positive that Australia allows multiple citizenship. Your second question, there is absolutely no requirement to become a US citizen. You can get your green card and you can be a permanent resident for life. You know, the only disadvantage would be that you're living in a country where you have no say in the government. You're not allowed to vote, which, especially if you live in Florida, that's a really important thing. And also you don't get a US passport. If you have an Australian passport, you're probably fine. You can travel visa free to most countries. But if you only had like a Bangladeshi passport, US passport would be quite valuable. And then the other thing is once you become a citizen, you can sponsor family members, which can be helpful too.
So not one of the questions, but one of my own, but what is the reasoning behind some of these countries having you renounce their citizenship in the original country when you get a new citizenship? Do you know what the rationale is behind that?
You know, for a lot of countries, they don't see how you can be loyal to more than one country. You know, what if those 2 countries go to war? Who are you going to fight for? Who are you going to support? So, you know, we do see that. But I think that's the reasoning. I think for a lot of countries, it's laws that were written long time ago that haven't been updated also.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, we got a couple of those in this country too. So we have another question. One of the attendees is under a J1 visa, a category researcher right now. After this visa expires and after the postdoc expires, what would be the most convenient visa for someone who wants to stay in the United States after the J1 visa?
Most likely the H-1B, assuming they're not subject to that 2-year requirement. Remember, for an H-1B, you do need an employer to sponsor you, but you know that would be the most logical option.
Okay, that makes sense. So there was a question here about there's a significant cost associated with the H-1B visa?
Yeah, there's a significant cost for everything, it seems like nowadays, and immigration is no exception. So yeah, what's important to know is that by law, the employer has to pay for the H-1B, both the attorney fees and the government fees. But yeah, it can be expensive. I would say an attorney fee is normally about $2,500 to $5,000 for an H-1B, and government fees depends on if it's a university or a private company and how big they are. but the fees will range from $960 to $2,500. So about $1,000 to $2,500 is the government fees, and that doesn't even include the optional expedite fee, which is $2,500.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. That's interesting.
David, if I
Go
may
ahead.
add to that, here at FAU, I know many postdocs are probably wondering, why do they have a J1 as opposed to an H1B? And to piggyback off this, it's really the cost. Some departments, you know, have made a decision that they are only going to offer a J1 visa to postdocs because it's less expensive. So it's really department specific that drives that decision. But I do know that some in the past have questioned, why do I have a J1? My department won't sponsor me for an H1B, and it's really because of the cost.
So if someone is on a J1 right now, is there a way, like what's the best way to convince FAU or another employer to actually invest in H1B? Just kind of talk about their skills and why it's important that they stay here, sort of thing.
Yeah, I would probably say that they should have a conversation with their supervisor to discuss their long-term plans. You know, a J1 typically has a 5-year maximum stay if you're a research scholar, where H1B has 6 years. So obviously discussing long-term what their plans are, you know, what do they plan on contributing here at FAU, how committed they are to the research, to the department, and things like that. And also consider the budget cost, because not only is it you know, a one-time cost at the beginning, but it's a reoccurring cost every time you need to renew that H1B visa. So there's many elements that come into play.
That makes sense. So for somebody who's on a J1 visa, which is currently what a lot of people are on, you said that getting a green card is pretty hard, or harder on a J1 than an H1B. When should people really start thinking about applying for a green card when they're on the J1?
It depends. Every scenario is different, and especially anyone from India and to a lesser extent China is in a really separate bucket, and needs to be analyzed separately because of their unique situations with green cards. So it just depends. I mean, I do have a good number of cases where we go J1 or OPT to green card, but these have been vetted by myself. The individual understands, you know, the pros, the cons, the risks. And so it can work out. It's just not as easy. There's a lot of hurdles that come up. But what I can tell you is, if you're a postdoc and you're thinking about maybe doing EB1 or national interest waiver down the road, you can start working on your case, and you should be working on your case. And what I mean by working on your case is publish, present, be a reviewer for journals, try to get grants, easier said than done. You know, be a key contributor on a grant that maybe your PI got, but build up your profile, build your CV. You know, do anything that you think can, you know, that can help your profile. And for a lot of things, it's challenging. It takes time. But you know what? You're doing what you're supposed to be doing as a postdoc. You know, furthering your research.
No, yeah, that makes sense. So, then I have a multi-question here about J1. So, can you obtain another J1 visa after fulfilling the 2-year rule?
Yeah, you can. There's more special rules about getting a second J1 that are even more complicated. But basically, yeah, you can. If you're a research scholar, which is what most postdocs are, once you finish that J1, regardless of whether you have that 2-year requirement or not, you have to wait 2 years before you can get that J1 again as a research scholar. But again, although it's both 2 years, there's two separate requirements.
Okay, that makes sense. And then if, say, you're still on the J1, when is the best time to apply for a J1 waiver? And then when you get that waiver, can the J1 be extended? Or
It can't. So that's the whole point, is that you want to plan strategically, because once you get the waiver, you cannot extend your J1. So again, there's no right or wrong answer. It depends on each individual situation, but it's something you want to plan in advance.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. We have a very specific question here. So they wanted to know your opinion on the strategy of the I-485 when you were a Chinese Communist member for 2 to 3 years going to China. And they thank you for your help.
When did they renounce their Communist Party affiliation?
2 to 3 years ago.
Yeah, I right now, I would say they're better off waiting. I believe it's a 5-year period. I'd have to double check, but I want to say it's either 5 or more, that you need to wait from when you renounced your membership. It's a relatively new issue that's come up recently. And so without more guidance and more direction, and I don't know how the Biden administration is going to tackle this, but I would say you want to wait until that period of time, which I believe is at least 5 years. So I would not recommend filing that now.
Okay, that makes sense. So we have another pretty specific question here. So there is someone here who's an Australian permanent resident and is here their first year of their postdoc. They're planning to go to Australia for a postdoc and to get an Australian passport, but they're asking if they leave the US after completing the first postdoc, can they come back here for a second postdoc?
Well, I don't know, Adriana, maybe you want to answer it, because I think it depends on whether they complete their record or just go for, a short trip and continue. So I think maybe better if you want to answer that.
Sure, thank you, Aaron. So as mentioned before, you can get another J1 visa. The J1 visa will tell you if you are a research scholar or if you're a short-term scholar. It will not say that you are necessarily a postdoc. So the postdoc title is given to you by the actual institution that's employing you. I believe that typically postdocs are limited for, a certain term. I know here at FAU it's like that. So if the thought is to come back to FAU in another postdoc position, I think that's something that the Division of Research may have to look into to see if their policies allow that. So the short answer to your question is you can get another J1 visa. Again, it will normally say research scholar. It will not indicate that you're a postdoc because that's more of an institution specific title.
Okay, that makes sense. So how long does it even take the C candidates to get a green card on average?
The what candidates?
When you showed that chart of
the people that have that are not from India or China, pretty much.
Correct.
If it's EB1, I would say from filing until green card, it's about 1 to 2 years, and honestly wouldn't be surprised if it's less than 1 year. If it's EB2 with a labor certification, it's 2 to 3 years, and if it's EB2 national interest waiver, it's about 1.5 to 2.5 years. All very approximate. Time frames are very, very, very inconsistent.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. When you're applying for this green card application, is it required that you have a lawyer?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. But I guess, how do lawyers help throughout the process? Is it, I imagine it's significantly harder without one, or is it pretty well-guided process?
It really depends. It depends on the type of case, and it depends on who you are. You know, if, you know, like, it's similar to like filing your taxes. You know, if you're a student and you don't really make any income and, you don't really own many assets, it's pretty easy to do your own taxes. Kind of like applying for OPT is pretty easy and most people do that on their own. But once you get older and you have, children and maybe have your own business, or then it starts to get complicated. Can you still do it? Yeah, but it's going to take you many, many, many hours of research. And then you're still going to have all these questions in your head and uncertainties. And so I think that's the best way to compare it.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Somebody's asking for a specific slide, but we're going to be sending out the slides, so that will be addressed with that. And then the H1B1, that's employee sponsored, correct? They have to get it with their employee. That's how they get one of those. And do they need a lawyer for that?
Are you asking about the H1B or the H1B1?
The H1B1, sorry.
Yeah, so the H1B1, that's only for people from Chile, citizens of Chile or Singapore.
Okay.
And yeah, you need an employer to sponsor you. Your employer would file the visa application on your behalf.
Okay. Okay. Along the same lines, when you're applying for citizenship, is that something that you also need a lawyer for, or is it also similar?
It's the same concept, although I would say applying for citizenship is a lot easier than applying for a green card. But it depends if you've, especially if you have a criminal record or if there's other issues, it may be more complicated. But for most people, that's a pretty straightforward application.
Okay. And then, so you can apply for citizenship, I guess. What?
So you need to have a green card for 5 years before you can apply for citizenship.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Okay. So if you applied and got funding on a federal grant, say from the NSF, for some years longer than your current OPT duration, including the STEM OPT extension, does that count towards a waiver from EB2? Seems like a complex question.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of many factors that they're going to be looking at. If you got that grant, but that's it, that may not be enough. But if you got that grant and you're first author on a few papers in high impact factor journals, you've been cited, maybe you're a reviewer for this top journal, then yeah, now you're starting to get a good case.
So that's more about building, that goes more towards building the case than being like, I have a grant and I have to stay here sort of thing.
There's only one thing that you can get that will automatically, you don't need anything else, and that's a Nobel Prize. So just get one of those, no problem. You don't even need an attorney for that.
Wow. Well, I'm glad there's some exception.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you negotiate that the H-1B fees with FAU can be covered by a grant?
Yeah, that's okay. And Adrian, I don't know if you want to mention it, but yeah, that is permissible if the grant permits it and the university permits it. Immigration allows that.
Yeah, that's correct, Aaron. Here at FAU, the cost, that the employer is required to pay a lot of times does come from grant-funded projects. So that's acceptable, yes.
And then for that H-1B1, sorry, there we go. For that H-1B1, you can have that for 6 years, you said?
The H-1B is for 6 years. The H-1B1, there is no limit, but you have to renew it every year.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm confusing the...
No, it's all confusing. I get it.
So is there a time limit on the green card? I guess how long can you, I guess the question is how long can you stay on the green card?
Forever, unless you commit a really bad crime, or if you move, you're not gonna be able to keep your green card if you leave the country and establish residence elsewhere. If you go for, a few month vacation, that's fine, but not if you go, more permanently. But otherwise, yeah, you can keep it for life.
How is there an actual determinate limit as to how long you can spend in another country?
No, it goes more towards your intent. And if
Okay.
immigration sees that you don't intend to stay in the US permanently, then they can revoke your green card. So they're going to look at many things, your travel history, your job, your family, your taxes, all, many, many different things to determine if you can maintain that permanent residence status.
Okay, that makes sense. So when you get one of the people is on their second J1, does that 5-year maximum get reset with another J1, or is it
Yep.
J1 and J2 together?
No, so you can do 5 years, and then you can do another 5 years as long as there's that gap in between. So yeah.
Okay. This is a question specifically for Adriana. Well, this is an FIU question. Or might have been FAU. Do they sponsor postdocs on an F1/OPT or a H1B visa? It says FIU in the.
Well, I can tell you the policy for
Yeah.
FIU and FAU is
Okay,
if you have OPT, we want you to utilize that OPT before you transition to something else, whether that's a J or an H.
So along that same line, if somebody is on an F1 or an OPT, can they take the H1B route even though they do not have a permanent position?
So you don't need a permanent position to get an H1B. You need the permanent position for certain of those green card categories.
You just need employer sponsorship for the H1B. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay. I believe that is all the questions that we currently have. The specific slide that was suggested was the evaluate the eligibility slide. I think we're currently seeing your thank you slide if you wanted to put up your the evaluate eligibility slide. Yes. Okay. Well, unless anybody has any other questions, thank you both very much for your time. Oh, never mind. Someone popped up. So they have 2 more years left on an academic training position. Should they wait for this time to pass before they apply for another visa?
No, don't do that, because once it already passes, then you have to leave the country. So, I mean, unless you're okay with that, ideally, you want to start, I would say, 10 months before it expires. You want to begin the paperwork to change your status, whether that is going to be H1B or something else, but don't wait till the last minute, and certainly don't wait till after your status has ended. Unless, of course, you are okay or have plans to spend some time back home.
And do you need to actually have a valid visa to work in the U.S. while your green card application is in process? You've said before that you kind of.
You don't need to, but I mean, if an employer is sponsoring you, they're not going to be happy if they're sponsoring you and going through all this process and you're sitting there at the beach because you can't work. But you could, I mean, you could be on an F2 visa, the spouse of a student, and be sponsored for a green card. Not normal, not common, but you could. And F2s can't go to school and they can't work. So, that's possible, but not something we commonly see.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Well, I think we've actually gotten to all the questions. If any other questions pop up, We can answer any unanswered questions that can be posted online. And thank you both very much for your time today. It's, like I said before, it's really helpful. And thank you everybody for tuning in to this webinar. Just a reminder that this is recorded and it will be posted online. And as you saw in the waiting room, there's a couple of events then that will be happening. And we got one more question that popped in. Can you get married in the US with a partner from your country and include them in your visa application?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And so everybody keep an eye on the calendar for upcoming events. And we're interested in figuring out the best topics to cover in future webinars. So there was a poll that was in the waiting room. And if you did not get a chance to fill that out, you'll be seeing an email from me in the future with a poll with the various subjects that we can be covering in future webinars. This will be sent to the FAU Postdocs. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Adriana, and all the audience members for participating.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.